They buried the ledger beneath a sycamore tree on the night of December the 4th, 1848. No gravestone, no name, just a black wax seal pressed into cracked leather, and one line, scrawled in crimson ink. To break the oath is to unbind the dead. Ashford was never meant to be found. Not on maps, not in history books. It sat between dying forests and frozen soil, hidden in a pocket of land where time didn't flow forward. It coiled inward. This wasn't a town, it was a boundary, and the name that carved it into existence was Whitmore. The Whitmores weren't kings, weren't generals. They didn't earn power. They inherited something older, something untraceable, something that didn't need thrones or titles to control the world around it. By the time cities rose and borders were drawn, the Whitmores had already disappeared from sight. Not gone, just buried, in influence, in names you'd never recognize, but always watching. In the winter of 1848, one Whitmore died for the world to see, but 3 more disappeared into silence. No funeral, no mourning, not even a whisper through the chapel halls. That's when the old rumors woke up again. They said the family had a book, a hand-written volume, bound in something that wasn't quite leather, passed down through blood, not birthright, and never read by outsiders, those who tried, didn't last through the winter. So why did Elijah Cobb, a preacher's son turned law clerk, travel from Boston to Ashford that October? Why did he live inside the Whitmore estate for 6 weeks, and then vanish without a single trace? Because he opened something sealed for generations, something meant to remain in the dark. This story is not myth. It's memory with the names scratched off. It's not about devils or angels. It's about design, because the Whitmore Blood Covenant wasn't a pact. It was an architecture, a mechanism to hat still pulses beneath old American soil, and once you hear it, once you understand how deep it goes, it doesn't let go. You start to see the pattern. In the news, in your lineage, in the institutions you trust. But that's the cost. That's the exchange. So come closer. And don't say you weren't warned. The Whitmore estate sat at the highest point of Ashford, not by accident, but by ordinance, by ritual, by design. 4 chimneys, 2 towers, and 17 windows, all aligned with something no architect in Boston could explain. Every room had a purpose, but not all purposes were meant for the living. They called it Whitmore House, but those who worked there called it the throat. Because everything went in, but nothing ever came out. Elijah Cobb arrived just after the harvest moon. He carried a leather satchel, a few letters of introduction, and a letter from the state archives requesting permission to examine the family's early land records. But land wasn't what he was looking for. He'd been following a trail, whispers buried in probate records, inconsistencies in generational death certificates, baptism dates that didn't add up, and a symbol carved into 4 separate gravestones in 4 separate towns, a symbol shaped like a door, wrapped in thorns, with no handle on the outside. The Whitmores welcomed him like they were expecting him, too warmly, too easily. Joseph Whitmore, the patriarch, tall, grey, with eyes like rusted keys, greeted him at the door with one hand behind his back. He didn't shake hands. "You'll be sleeping in the east wing," he said. "There's light there in the morning." Elijah nodded, but even then, he felt it. The stillness. Not quiet like peace, quiet like warning. No dogs, no clocks, no servants he could see. Just candles, always burning, even in the day, and portraits. Dozens, maybe hundreds, lining the halls from floor to ceiling. None with names, but all with eyes that followed. He unpacked that night without speaking a word. The bed was made, the sheets cold. On the nightstand, a single book, blank cover, no title, inside, only a quote. The gate does not open. It remembers who was let in. He closed the book, set it down, turned to the wall. Indau, and in the reflection of the glass, a woman standing behind him. But when he turned, there was no one there. By the second day, the questions had already started. Not from Elijah, from the family. Joseph Whitmore sat at the head of a long oak table each morning. No breakfast ever served. Just black coffee and silence. Beside him, Miriam Whitmore, skin pale as parchment, hands folded like a prayer that had never been answered. "Elijah," she said on that second morning, "do you believe memory can rot?" He blinked, unsure if she meant trauma or disease, but something in her tone told him not to answer quickly. "I think memory protects us," he offered, "and buries what it must." Miriam didn't smile. She just said, "That's what we were afraid of." The rest of the day passed in near silence. Elijah spent hours in the North Library. Rows of books that weren't indexed, that weren't in English. Some were handwritten, some etched into wood. One was sealed shut with braided hair. And then, behind the third shelf, he found it. A drawer that didn't belong. No handle, no hinge. Just resistance. But he pressed, and it opened. Inside, 4 documents, all death records, all stamped unverified in red ink. All belonging to Whitmores who had no birth records, only arrival dates, and on the back of each sheet, the same symbol, the door. Thorns. No handle. He pocketed one. He shouldn't have. That night, the air changed. The house felt tighter, as if the wood itself was watching. And the candles in the hallway began to flicker in sequence, left to right, like someone walking. But when he opened the door to the hall, it was empty, no sound, no wind, until he turned back to his bed and saw it, carved into the pillowcase, not with a knife, with a fingernail, a symbol, the same door. But this time, it was open. The next morning, Joseph was waiting for him in the conservatory. Glass ceiling, dead plants, a piano with one missing key. "Elijah," he said without turning, "do you know what binds a man to a place?" Elijah hesitated. "Obligation," he said. Joseph shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "Blood." He offered Elijah a seat. The cushion had a faint red stain at the edge. "I want to show you something," Joseph said, and handed him a small bone-colored envelope. Inside, a photograph, black and white, faded. 6 men in dark coats standing before the Whitmore estate, but none of them had faces. Not blurred, not scratched. Gone. Taken in 1883. Joseph said, "They stood where you're sitting now." Elijah looked up, confused, unsettled. "And what happened to them?" Joseph smiled for the first time. "They forgot who they were." He stood and walked away without another word. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He read, he searched, and at midnight, the piano played one note. Just one. When he ran to the conservatory, it was empty, except for a single item placed on the piano bench, a child's shoe. No dust on it, no wear, just placed, like an offering. He returned to his room and locked the door, but even as he sat on the edge of the bed, he could feel it, the vibration of the house, not like a storm, not like wind, like breath, like something old, just beneath the floorboards. And when he finally slept, the dreams came, a corridor without end, candles melting upward, and behind him, a voice he couldn't see, whispering the same phrase again and again. It is not buried, it is fed. When he woke, his pillow was damp. His ears were ringing, and on the wall above his head, drawn in ash, the symbol again. But this time, the door was open, and something was standing behind it. He tried to leave the estate at dawn, packed what little he had. But the front gate, the one he walked through just days before, was chained shut from the inside. Heavy links, rusted, no keyhole. Just a carved plaque nailed into the iron frame. 5 words. We remember what enters willingly. He turned back toward the house, and from the 3rd-story window, Miriam was watching, still, expressionless, but with one hand pressed to the glass, palm covered in ash. When Elijah re-entered the house, the doors shut behind him. Not loudly, softly, like someone had been waiting. That day, the Whitmores said nothing. No meals, no questions, only silence. He returned to the library, determined to understand what was happening. And that's when he found the Codex Vestiga, a book with no title on the spine, wrapped in velvet, bound in something that resisted his grip. When he opened it, the writing bled across the pages. Not ink, something thicker. Names, dates, symbols, all scratched into the surface as if written in urgency. Or pain. One entry stood out. October 1741. 3rd generation. Renewed under pressure. The blood rejected the host. But the covenant remains. Another entry. July 1799. Twins born during eclipse. One kept, one taken, veins like roots, eyes like silence. Elijah turned the page, and his name was there, not written, carved. Elijah Cobb, marked, 1848. He dropped the book, but it did not fall. It hovered, suspended in the air, for just a moment, then closed itself. He backed away, shaking. And that's when Miriam appeared behind him again. No footsteps, no breath. She whispered, "You opened the record. Now the record opens you." Then she was gone. That night Elijah didn't sleep, not because of fear. That was already something he'd accepted, but because the house itself refused it. The walls pulsed with sound, not music, not wind, but murmurs, voices repeating fragments of conversations he never had. His own name spoken in a child's voice, then a woman's, then something inhuman, drawn out, like the syllables were not meant for a human tongue. He opened his door and stepped into the hallway. All the lights were off, but a pale green glow pulsed from beneath the floorboards. It followed him as he walked, like the house tracked his movement. Breath for breath, he turned a corner and froze. In front of him stood a row of children, silent, barefoot, each one with waxy skin and glassy eyes, their arms outstretched, palms blackened with soot. One by one they turned and walked through the wall. He touched the surface where they vanished, stone cold, but slightly damp, as if freshly weeping. The next morning at breakfast, Mrs. Whitmore smiled. No mention of the night, only a question. "Did you dream?" Elijah didn't answer, because the truth was, the dream had come after he woke. It wasn't sleep that brought the visions, it was awareness. Later that day he followed a staircase he hadn't seen before. It wound downward, deeper than the basement, deeper than should have been architecturally possible. And at the bottom, a door made of stone, no handle, only a hollow where a hand would go. He reached toward it, hesitated, then pressed his palm inside. The stone warmed, then hissed, then split. What lay beyond was not a room, it was a chamber, circular, carved with thousands of names, some in Latin, some in languages he didn't recognize, and one repeated over and over, etched in a spiral leading to the center, Vestiga, and in the middle, a mirror, but the reflection wasn't his. The mirror was tall, framed in iron vines, blackened by age, but still pulsing with that same green shimmer that had followed him through the floorboards. Elijah stood in front of it, breath tight. He expected to see his own face, worn, frightened, but still his. Instead, he saw a child, a boy, no older than 10, standing in a room not his own, a room of white walls, too white, eyes wide, too wide. Looking directly into the mirror from the other side, but not seeing Elijah, seeing something behind him, Elijah turned. But no one was there. When he looked back, the boy was gone. And now the mirror showed another figure, a woman in a black veil, hands folded, head bowed, mouthing words. No sound. Then lifting her veil, and her face was his. Not similar, exactly his. Eyes, lips, even the scar he got at 17. Elijah stumbled back, nearly fell. The air around the mirror rippled, like heat. And then, a voice. You have already chosen. It wasn't loud, but it carved itself into his mind, as if it were memory, not sound. The mirror cracked, spiderwebs branching across the surface, and behind the glass, Elijah saw scenes that didn't belong to him, but that felt like they did. A man signing a book, blood on parchment, a child born under a red moon, a fire in a chapel, with no doors, and always, always. The name Vestiga etched in the corners. He reached out, not knowing why, and touched the broken glass. The shard sliced his finger. He pulled back, but the blood didn't drip. It hovered, suspended, then spread itself across the mirror's crack, sealing it and changing the reflection once again. Now it was his face, but hollowed, as if he'd aged 30 years, eyes black, smile wide, whispering something Elijah couldn't hear, yet understood completely. He had not come to find answers. He had come to fulfill a role. He stumbled from the mirror room like a drunk, but the house wouldn't let him fall. The walls pulsed with every heartbeat he didn't realize he was still having. The hallway stretched longer than it had when he entered. No windows, no clocks, only doors that hadn't been there before. Each one marked with a different insignia, a hand with too many fingers, a closed eye with thorns, a stairwell spiraling into a mouth. He opened none of them, but he knew where they led, because something was whispering now, louder than before, not in English, not in anything human. But he understood it. Vestiga is not a name. It is a sentence. It is a place between. It is a house that chooses. He passed a door that screamed as he neared. Not out loud, but inside him. He pressed on, and finally reached the grand stairwell again. But it was wrong. It curved in the opposite direction now. Up was down. Down was not permitted. He took the first step, and the lights above dimmed. Portraits lined the walls, each face watching him. Not painted, but moving. A loop of expression, fear, surrender, silence. One portrait showed a boy, the same child from the mirror. Only now his eyes were stitched shut, threaded with rusted wire, and behind him, barely visible, was that same veiled woman, looming, smiling, holding a black candle. Elijah tore his eyes away. But the whispering became voices. Voices became screams, and the screams were his own. His voice, calling names he didn't remember learning, begging for release from something he couldn't name. Then silence, one step left. He took it, and everything stopped. No wind, no sound, no breath. The house exhaled, and he was no longer in the stairwell. He stood now in a chamber, circular, stone, wet, and in the center, the altar, not new, not ancient, timeless, covered in names carved over names, a pile of bones in its basin, some animal, some human, some waiting to become one or the other, and above it, hanging from chains, a lantern that burned with no flame, only motion, only memory, He was not here by accident. He was summoned, marked, prepared, and now the house would ask what he brought in return. The chains above the altar groaned as the lantern swayed. Its motion stirred the bones, as if some of them were still listening, still hoping. Elijah stepped forward. He didn't remember telling his feet to move. He didn't feel them touch the ground, but the altar grew closer. The symbols around it began to glow, not with fire, but with recognition. It knew him. Not just his name, but what he thought he'd buried. The stone basin pulsed. He looked down, and among the bones there was something wrapped in cloth, familiar. It was the Bible he carried when he was 8, the one his mother gave him, the one he threw into the river the night she died. He reached for it, but the cloth shifted on its own, unraveling, and inside was not paper, not scripture, but his voice, woven into pages made of skin, words he'd never said aloud, but had thought in anger, in fear, in shame. The lantern above flickered violently. The house had waited long enough. A low hum began, deeper than hearing. It pressed against his chest. It peeled memory from bone. It remembered him, not as a man, but as a boy who opened something behind his grandfather's barn, a boy who never told anyone, a boy who let something crawl into him, then forgot. Until now, the altar wasn't asking for sacrifice. It was reminding him he already gave it, and suddenly the cloth caught fire, not with flame, but with truth. It burned away everything false, everything he built. The voice that came from the bones was his own, but older, colder, clearer. It said, "Do you remember the price? You offered it gladly. Now it is time to collect." The stone behind him cracked, the chamber breathed, and a shape began to rise from beneath the altar. Not creature, not shadow, but what he used to be, and it smiled with a mouth Elijah didn't know he had. It had his face, but it was not him. The smile was wrong, too wide, too slow, like something mimicking a man. The skin was pale, not from fear but from absence, like it had never been touched by sunlight, only by promises. Elijah stepped back, but the chamber didn't let him. The ground behind him shifted, turning soft, turning wet, as if he were sinking into a memory he never made. The thing spoke, but no sound came, only pressure, like 1,000 hands pressing against the inside of his skull, showing him nights he never lived, rooms he never entered, and a mirror that never stopped watching. It walked toward him, gracefully, reverently, like a priest walking the aisle of a long-forgotten church. But its eyes, they were not eyes, they were tunnels, and at the end of them he saw himself, but after the mask fell, after the pact was sealed, after the silence had taken root, he tried to speak, but the chamber had stolen language, only breath remained, and even that began to feel borrowed. The altar shifted again. Bones rearranged themselves into a seat, a throne. It wanted him to sit, not in honor but in remembrance, because this was not the first time. It was the 100th, the 1,000th. Elijah had been here before, in other names, other bodies, always forgetting, always returning. The walls pulsed with soundless chants, the kind only heard in dreams you don't remember, the kind that wake you screaming, but leave no trace. He looked at the figure again. It was closer, now standing where he stood. It leaned down and whispered with a voice made of ash, "We were never two, only divided, only waiting." The chains above the altar dropped, not to bind, but to welcome. And somewhere deeper in the house, something enormous began to stir, as if this moment had opened a lock, older than language, older than man, and the weight of what he'd forgotten came crashing down. He was never supposed to remember, not the steps, not the symbol, not the name written in bone behind the walls, but the house remembered, and it had waited for him to bleed enough, to crack just enough, for memory to slip back in like a fog that doesn't ask permission. He turned, or tried to, but his body moved on its own, like the house was puppeting his limbs, rehearsing an old ceremony that required no rehearsal, because it had been etched into the marrow of his bones. The stained glass no longer showed saints, it showed faces, and they were watching him, not with judgment, but with recognition, as if they had once worn his skin too. Beneath the floorboards, a slow thump began. Not like footsteps, but like a second heart, ancient, mechanical, made of wood and teeth. He walked the corridor now, the same corridor he had once fled as a boy. But there were no doors this time, only frames, each holding a version of him, younger, older, smiling, screaming, silent. In one frame, he was digging. In another, he was lying still as people in dark veils surrounded him. And in the last, he was opening a box, his eyes gone, his mouth sewn shut. And yet still he smiled. He wanted to run, but the house does not allow running. It only absorbs. Each step he took left no footprint, only silence. As if time was being erased behind him, a whisper followed him now. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the inside of his chest. Not in English, not in Latin, but in a language that felt like hunger. He remembered now. He had brought something back from the cellar that night. Not just the doll, not just the bone, but a pattern, a psychic stain passed from house to guest, from guest to heir, from heir to tomb, and now the cycle had come back around. The floor was warm now, not like heat from a fire, but like breath, slow, rising, falling, as if the house were alive and he was walking across its chest. The wallpaper peeled in spirals, revealing carvings beneath, not painted. Carved, hundreds of them, each with a date, each with a name, and some with his name spelled slightly different, as if the house had been practicing. There was no staircase anymore, only a ladder, old wood, wet to the touch, and it didn't creak when he climbed, because things only creak when they resist. He descended into blackness, one rung, then another, each rung warmer than the last, until the heat felt like a fever blooming behind his eyes. And then the soil, not basement, not cellar, but earth, soft, sinking, alive with something that didn't crawl but coiled. He raised his lantern, though he didn't remember bringing one, and saw it, a structure, not wood, not stone, but bone, stacked in precise geometry, forming an altar. And above it, suspended by chains, the portrait, the one that was missing, the one they had said never existed. It was of him, painted long ago, but the eyes were wrong, too wide, too knowing, and inside each pupil, movement, like something was watching from behind the canvas. The altar pulsed, not with light but with memory, visions rushing into his mind, the house, the sisters, the boarders, the deaths, each guest a sacrifice, each room a chamber in a living cathedral of sorrow, and he wasn't the heir, he was the final piece, the keystone to finish the ritual, and the house. The house had waited centuries for him to return. He tried to speak, but his mouth moved with the same puppet motion as before, reciting words older than English, older than guilt, a vow, a welcome, a surrender. And when he touched the altar, the house exhaled. The earth beneath him did not collapse. It opened as if pleased, as if welcoming its final guest. The ground split in a slow spiral, a tunnel of ribcage and root, descending into something older than the town, older than the land itself, a place carved not by tools, but by memory, by repetition, by sacrifice. He was no longer climbing. He was descending by will, or the house's will. It was hard to tell now where one ended and the other began. The air was thick, but not with dust, with whispers, unheard syllables that brushed his ear. Not from outside, but from within, like his own thoughts had turned against him and begun speaking in foreign tongues. And then, the room, no walls, no ceiling, just blackness that curved inward, shaped like a wound in reality. And in the center, the thing that called itself the Witness. It had no face, only skin, stretched tightly across something shifting, as if the truth couldn't bear to be seen. And so it wore secrecy like a second skin. It reached toward him without moving, a gesture of claiming, not welcome, not threat, just inevitability. And when it spoke, it didn't use sound, it used understanding. It unfolded knowledge directly into him, layer by layer, unpeeling his defenses, revealing everything. The sisters were not caretakers, they were anchors, placed there to keep the memory alive, to keep the ritual repeating, to feed the house with sorrow, so it would stay open to what lay beneath. The borders, the disappearances, the silence, all part of the design. The house did not exist in the town. It existed around it, wrapped like a cocoon, feeding off the grief of its residents like a parasite with perfect manners. And him, he was the closing act, the final mourner, the one who would not just witness but merge. So the house would no longer need rooms or walls, it would become memory itself, living through him, every door, every breath, every forgotten death. And in that moment, he understood. This had never been about finding the truth. It was about becoming it. The town did not notice at first, because the change came gently, like a mist that seemed normal, until it entered your lungs and never left. Streetlights began to flicker, not from faulty wires, but as if they were blinking, trying to communicate something only the blind could understand. Mail never arrived, because there was nowhere to send it. Addresses blurred, numbers vanished from doors. Even the maps in town records began to shift, as if the house had leaned against reality just enough to smudge it. Neighbors forgot names, then faces, then entire families. Even the graves lost their engravings. Stone rubbed smooth not by weather, but by intention. And the children, they stopped drawing the house because it now drew them. One by one they were found standing still on their porches, eyes wide, mouths open, listening to something no one else could hear. And when they spoke, they said things like, "She's here now," or "The man is inside the wallpaper," or "Mummy's dreams are dripping." The preacher tried to intervene, but his sermons began looping, each week the same words, slightly more distorted, until the final one, where he opened his Bible and found every page blank, except one, written in a script no one recognized, not even him. People began hearing footsteps that didn't match the floorboards, doors opened inward that used to open out, and reflections no longer mirrored, but mimicked. One man broke every mirror in his home, only to find them whole again the next morning. Except now, they were ahead of him, moving slightly before he did, like the reflections had grown impatient and started living first. Phone calls came from disconnected numbers, static that spoke like breathing, long pauses between phrases, as if the voice on the other end was trying to remember how to be human, and through it all the house stood unchanged, its porch always clean, its windows always lit, its door always slightly ajar, as if inviting the entire town to remember something they never wanted to know, because the house was not just in the town, it had become the town. And every forgotten name, every lost letter, every prayer that vanished mid-sentence, was just another room being added to its structure. It was expanding, not with wood, but with memory, with grief, with silence, until there was no difference between Barrow Street and the thing that fed beneath it. Caleb Morrow was the first to try, to pack a bag, to get in his truck, to leave Barrow Street behind him like a bad dream someone else had. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't say goodbye. He just loaded up before sunrise, while the town still pretended to sleep. But the road had changed. The turnpike wasn't where it used to be. The signs pointed inward, back toward the center of town. Even the crows flew in circles above him. as if warning him. Not watching, but herding. He drove for hours, or what felt like hours, but every tree he passed seemed familiar. Same branch broken, same hollow trunk, same old nails sticking from the bark, like the road had been nailed down to loop in place. Eventually, the gas ran out, not slowly, but all at once, like the truck had given up the idea of escape before he had. He got out, started walking, but the air shifted, the temperature changed with every step. Warm, then cold, heavy, then too light, like breathing through cotton soaked in memory. He saw a farmhouse, not old, not new, just there, as if it had grown from the ground overnight, its windows too dark, its door too wide, its curtains barely moving like lungs that forgot how to breathe. He knocked, not because he expected someone, but because something told him to. The door opened, but there was no one behind it, just a long hallway, and at the end a mirror. Only it wasn't him. It was Caleb. Yes, but the version that had never tried to leave, the one still in town, still nodding politely, still pretending not to hear the house whisper through the trees at night. That version smiled, raised its hand, and waved, but Caleb didn't, because he couldn't. His arms wouldn't move, his feet sank an inch into the wood beneath him, and behind him the door slowly closed. He wasn't outside anymore, he was in, and there was no lock, no knob, no exit, because once you tried to leave, the house didn't punish you. It absorbed you, rewrote you, filed you away, and left a version of you back home, so no one would ask where you went. The Barrow Street Council met every third Wednesday. They always had, they always would. Even if the faces around the table kept changing, or aging in reverse, or staying exactly the same. They gathered in the old church basement, the one with no congregation, no stained glass, no God, only chairs in a circle, and a table that was never bought, but always there. Mayor Lunsford called the meeting to order. Only his mouth didn't move. The words came from him, but not out of him, like the air itself spoke on his behalf. They were here to discuss the disappearances, but not really. No one said the word, not once. Instead, they said phrases like unaccounted presence fluctuations and community integration delays. It wasn't about the truth. It was about appearances. As long as someone wore a badge, held a clipboard, made notes, the town could pretend it wasn't unraveling. But that night, they invited someone new, a man in a long black coat, face too symmetrical, eyes too grey, accent from nowhere. He introduced himself as Mr. Creel, said he was from the Historical Oversight Office. Only no one had ever heard of such a place, and when they asked where it was located, he said, "Wherever the ground remembers." They let him speak, because they were tired, because they were desperate, because their own rules no longer made sense. He told them the town was built wrong, said the soil beneath Barrow Street was hungry, said it fed on contradiction, memory and blood without history. He offered a solution, a ritual, an adjustment that would quiet the ground, put the clock back in place, make people forget again. All he needed was a space, a silence, and one person who wouldn't be missed. Not forever, just long enough to seal the pattern the council voted. 11 hands rose, one stayed down, but the vote passed, and the silence crept in. That night, someone's name vanished from every record. Their house locked itself, their voice far, dead from memories. Even their photographs adjusted, leaving blank spaces, where a face used to be. Barrow Street slept soundly for the first time in months, but it was the kind of sleep that felt like being buried, not rested. And when morning came, the church basement was empty again, except for the table and the faint smell of salt, like someone had cried for too long in a place that had no ears. It started with the drawings, crude charcoal sketches on classroom blackboards, on the backs of church programs, even in the condensation on school bus windows. Children across Barrow Street, uncoordinated, unprompted, began sketching the same thing, a map. It wasn't of Barrow Street, Not exactly, but it overlapped it, bent its corners, folded its streets in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow did. The map showed alleys that curved into graveyards, schools that had never existed, a second post office behind the first, and beneath it all, a tunnel that connected every home, every room, every bed. Teachers dismissed it as coincidence until 6 students from different schools all drew the same spiral at the center and called it the nursery. They didn't remember doing it. Said their hands moved on their own. Said it felt like writing down a memory they didn't have. Parents panicked, called in pastors, therapists, historians. But no one could explain why the town's children were mapping places no adult could find or remember. Then one parent followed her son when he walked out sleepwalking at 2:13 a.m., barefoot, silent, straight down Millstone Avenue, through a locked fence, into a thicket that had no path. She followed him in and found the door. Not a metaphorical one, not a dream, an actual wooden door with no hinges, carved into the base of an ancient tree, with markings too old to be local, too sharp to be natural. Her son placed his hand on it, whispered the word. Hollow light. And the door began to breathe. She pulled him back, ran, didn't stop, didn't speak of it for weeks, but something followed them back. Not a thing, not a creature, a pattern. From that night on, the map began to update. By itself, in notebooks, in dust, even in the ice on the windows. New paths formed, new rooms appeared, and always that spiral in the center, growing darker, tighter. They sent one child away to a specialist upstate. But he might. Led back a drawing, same map, more detailed, and a note that said, "I think I lived there before." That week, 3 more children disappeared. No doors broken, no windows open, just beds that looked too smooth, too untouched, and always that spiral showing them the way. She hadn't spoken in years, not since the fire in '84, when her husband disappeared, and half the records of Barrow Street went with him. Eleanor Grace Whitlow, now 98, blind in one eye, living in a care home just past the edge of town, the kind of place people send secrets to rot quietly. But when she heard about the children, she asked to speak, whispered, "I've seen that map." And everyone froze. She said the last time this happened was in 1912. Not 1913, not 1911, specifically 1912. A season of shadows, that's what she called it. She said children vanished then too. But no one told the town, because those children came back, except they weren't the same. They all had different eyes, spoke in mirrored words, told their parents about places buried beneath Barrow Street that no living person could have known. One of them, her brother, would wake up in the middle of the night, sitting straight up, repeating the word, nursery, over and over until his nose bled. She remembers the look on his face, not fear, not rage, but recognition, like he saw something in that spiral and was waiting for it to see him back. And then one night, he simply wasn't in his bed. No signs, no screams, just a soft echo, like a lullaby playing under the floorboards. Eleanor said the map appeared that week, just like now, in chalk, in frost, in spilled sugar across the kitchen counter, leading nowhere, and yet somehow still guiding. Her mother drew it once, out of instinct, on a plate with gravy, and collapsed screaming. Because halfway through, she realized it wasn't a map. It was a blueprint, a design, for something that needed to be rebuilt, something that had been forgotten, but not erased. That was the word Eleanor kept using. Not erased. She said the town tried to bury the event, bricked up basements, paved over wells, changed names of streets that bent too far inward. But the design, the spiral, never went away. It just waited. And now, It's waking up again. We found the journal by accident, buried behind a false wall in the old town hall, just behind the historian's office, where no blueprints ever mentioned a crawl space. It was wrapped in linen, tied with hair. Human hair, still curled at the ends like it had been cut yesterday. The cover had no title, only a stamped marking, Silo 1. The historian, Mr. Arden Bixley, went pale the moment he touched it. He didn't open it right away. He just said, "I've seen that word before," and pointed toward the town's water tower, where the rust pattern spells out the same thing. Silo. A coincidence, he used to think. Now he wasn't so sure. The journal started with entries dated 1783, but the handwriting didn't match the style of the time. It was cleaner, sharper, almost clinical. The first page said, "Control group established. Topsoil extracted. Phase 1 successful. Containment breached twice, but reabsorbed." What did that mean? Control group. Topsoil. Reabsorbed. Arden turned pages like he was unlocking something he already feared. He found sketches, not of people, but of structures. Tall, twisting. Some kind of chambers, each labeled with a name. Not names like people, but concepts. Hunger chamber, imitation nursery, breath engine. And then, halfway through, a sentence scrawled across the top of a torn page. "Barrow is the lid. Do not remove it. Do not disturb the spiral beneath." There was a second booklet wedged inside the journal. Newer, written in red pencil, it listed family names, dozens of them. Bixley, Thorne, Whitlow, Harrow, Gideon. Every prominent family in town, including mine. Arden refused to speak after that. He just shook his head. Repeated, They knew what this place was built on. He locked himself inside his office, covered the windows, started burning the older town maps, and on the 5th day he was gone. No sign of break-in, no note, just a single word carved into the underside of his desk, a word not in English, but one that somehow we all understood. It meant return. It started with the children, first just one of them, then nearly all. They began drawing, but not the usual things. No houses, no trees, no stick figures holding hands. Instead, circles within circles, spirals that folded into themselves, tunnels, endless tunnels, leading down into nothing. The schoolteacher, Miss Lillian Edge, noticed they all used only one crayon, black. She said the drawings weren't random, they were exact. Each child, whether 6 or 11, was drawing the same shapes, same angles, same distortions, like they were copying something they'd all seen. Except no one showed them. She brought one of the drawings to the mayor. He laughed at first, until she unfolded all 30 pages, spread them on his desk. Perfect alignments, edges locking like puzzle pieces, forming one large design, a design that looked less like a picture and more like a map. And at the center, a word, scrawled over and over, in a shaky hand, return, return, return. The mayor asked where the children had gotten this. Miss Edge said she didn't know, but she'd heard them whispering, not to each other, to the walls, especially one wall in particular. The north side of the classroom, where nothing was posted, just blank plaster. One of the boys, Elias Rigg, stared at it during recess, didn't move, didn't blink, and when she called his name, he answered without turning. It's open now. That night, Elias vanished from his bed, window locked, no footprints, no sign of struggle, only his bedsheets, laid out flat, with one of the spiral drawings centered perfectly, as if pressed there by heat. The next morning, a new child in town, an orphan girl named Miriam, who had never met Elias, told her foster mother at breakfast, "He's not gone. He's waiting in the chalk." And when she was asked what that meant, she simply said, "They all wait in the lines, they talk when we sleep, they teach us things." Miss Edge resigned the next day. No letter, no goodbye, Jew. Just her house emptied out, every window covered in tar paper, except one, where a single child's drawing had been taped from the inside, a spiral leading not down, but up. After Miss Edge vanished, the school was closed for inspection. They said it was mold, water damage, something explainable. But what they found beneath the north wall was not rot. It was stone, not natural rock, but hand-laid bricks, forming a perfect circle like the edge of a well. Except no well had ever been documented there. No record, no reason. The local historian, Mr. Dobbins, insisted the town had no subterranean structures, especially not under the old schoolhouse. He brought maps, surveys, testimony going back to 1803. But the well was there, real, cold, and far deeper than it should have been. When they dropped a light, it didn't hit bottom, it just vanished, swallowed into something blacker than earth. The inspector sent a camera down. The footage began normally. Stone walls, dripping condensation. Then after 40 feet, everything changed. The bricks stopped, and what followed wasn't tunnel, wasn't cave. It looked almost like ribs, bone-white curves, alive with something slow-moving, like breathing. Then the camera shorted out. A flash of red, a sound like something whispering in reverse. The inspector locked the room, took the footage to the city office. But by morning, he was gone. Car still in the lot, his boots at the door, no sign of struggle. Only the camera, returned to the base of the well, coiled neatly, like it had never been used. The town tried to fill it, dumped rubble, sand, concrete. But every night the rubble would be gone. As if eaten, the mayor ordered the room sealed, bricked it up, poured iron over the entrance, posted warnings, trespassers would be arrested. But it didn't stop the drawings. Children in other towns, miles away, started sketching the spiral, started whispering the same word, return, return, return. And one morning, in a neighboring county, a playground collapsed into the earth. At the bottom, a stone ring, perfectly circular, perfectly familiar. Still breathing. They were expanding the foundation, pouring new concrete where the courtyard once was, when the diggers hit something hard, not stone, not pipe. It was a box, 7 feet long, made of iron, welded shut from the inside. The workers thought it was a time capsule, until they heard it move, not shaking, not frantic, but breathing, like something waiting, preserved, pacing its lungs against metal. The police were called. So were the university historians. No one wanted to touch it. But that night rain came down harder than it had all year, and the box began to sing, not music, not voice, but a resonance. Low, pulsing, like an ancient chord striking bone, the welds broke at midnight, split open like something had finally earned its way out, and inside they found a man, his skin pale as parchment, his eyes sewn shut with thread blacker than ash. He should have been dead for centuries, but he moved, breathed, mouthed words. His stitched lips could not speak. A paper was nailed to his chest, one line written in blood. He opened it once. Now he keeps it closed. The archivist searched and found records. One, faint. In a ledger from 1817, the name Ephraim Holt, a student expelled for unnatural behavior, marked dangerous, buried in secret for the good of the town. He'd been 19 when they sealed him, and now, over 200 years later, he looked the same. He was taken to the hospital, but none of the machines could read him. Heart rate, temperature, all 0. Still he lived, still he breathed, and all night the security cameras caught him mouthing the same word, return, return, return. At 3 a.m. the power went out. When it came back, The hospital wing was empty. Only the bed remained, pressed with the outline of a man, still warm, still wet with iron-smelling sweat. In the hallway, the spiral was drawn again, finger-painted in something dark and sticky. Ephraim Holt had vanished. But the ground outside the school had cracked open, and from beneath, something was rising. They thought it was over, but by dawn, 12 people were missing. Not children, not the elderly, not the forgotten. These were respected. Accountants, teachers, a retired judge vanished between one breath and the next. Their houses were intact, doors locked from the inside, dinner still hot on the stove. But their mirrors, every mirror in their homes, had shattered inward, as if something had stepped through. Then the phone calls began, from states away, Chicago, Atlanta, even one from a border town in Mexico, each call the same. A trembling voice, half-conscious, saying they woke up naked, alone, lying in a forest or roadside ditch, their feet bloodied, hands curled into fists, and always the same thing carved over their heart, a spiral, thin and shallow, like it had been traced with a warm blade. None of them remembered how they got there, but all of them said they dreamed the same dream. A corridor, stone walls wet with breath, a man standing at the end, eyes sewn shut, whispering something through clenched teeth. They didn't know what it meant, but they all said it felt ancient, older than the country, older than language itself. Some tried to return to the town, but every road bent, shifted, turned them around without explanation. Those who forced their way back didn't stay long. One man walked into the church at midnight screaming, clawed at his own face, until the pastor tackled him. He was taken to the emergency room. When the doctors calmed him, he only said 4 words before passing out again. He's digging from inside. The local paper stopped publishing updates. Reporters were told to leave the school alone. City officials closed off the building, claimed structural issues, but that didn't stop the sounds. Every night, people who lived near the grounds heard footsteps where there should be none, chalk against slate. And once, a woman walking her dog at dusk saw a classroom light flick on. Inside, she swore. She saw children sitting perfectly still, facing the blackboard, eyes glowing under flickering bulbs. But the school was empty, padlocked, condemned. Still, the blackboard had new writing every morning, lines etched deep into slate, written backwards, over and over. The test begins at 1. The bell tolls when none remain. They found her in a nursing home outside Asheville, a retired schoolteacher named Mabel Lawn, 89. Legally blind, living alone in a shared room, she hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since her husband passed. Staff thought she'd slipped too far into silence to ever return. But when she saw the article, the one about the 12 missing, something in her woke up. She didn't ask for her glasses. She didn't need them. She just whispered, "It's unfinished. I warned them it wasn't sealed right." They called her son, then a priest, then the police. But by the time they arrived, she was already drawing, scratching symbols into the wall with her fingernail, until her finger bled. The shapes matched the ones from the school basement. Identical spirals, interlocking branches, a circle broken 3 times. When asked what it meant, she said it was the gate, and it had been weakening since the fire. In 1972, she and 6 others had gathered there, not to teach, but to bury. Not bodies, but a presence. Something left behind after the war, when that place wasn't a school yet, when it was still a listening post. She said they were young then, just trying to contain it, but they didn't know the right words, didn't have the right names, and someone tampered with the sigils afterward, reversed 2 of them, called something else into the circle. That's when it began. The false faces, the cold voices, the way children stopped remembering their own names after class. They shut the place down for a while, said it was asbestos, But it wasn't. They were just trying to starve it. But things like that don't starve, they wait, and they learn. And then she said something that made the nurse back out of the room slowly. She said, "They're not missing. They're answering attendance, and it's still calling the roll." That night Mabel vanished from her bed. No one saw her leave. No cameras recorded it, but on the sheets, drawn with her own blood, was a perfect map of the school. Every hallway, every floor, even the old underground section no one remembered building. The part sealed with iron and river rock, the part with no doors. The police said it was a hallucination, delirium, end-of-life trauma. But 3 days later, a maintenance crew near the condemned wing broke through an old wall. Behind it was a staircase, descending into pure black, and at the bottom was a door. It was warm to the touch, and something on the other side was breathing. The diocese released a statement the next morning. Brief, cold, measured. They denied ever owning the property, denied any involvement with the school's founding, denied knowledge of the underground structure. But Father Ellis did not deny anything, because he didn't show up for Mass, or for confession, or for the bishop's inquiries. He turned himself in to the sheriff, carrying a single suitcase. Inside were 7 notebooks, all handwritten, all dated before 1960. He said nothing until the room was cleared. No cameras, no lawyers, just one deputy left behind to listen. And then, after almost an hour of silence, he said this: "We were never meant to protect the children." That was just the story they told us. The symbols, the rituals, the prayers. They were never seals. They were offerings. He said the land itself was consecrated, but not to God, that before it was a school, before it was even a post, the earth there was already marked. He described ceremonies held under the floorboards, where hymns were sung backwards and ash was poured into cracks that never closed. He said there was something in the ground, old, patient, but not sleeping, that it responded to memory, to pain, to anything said too often in the dark. That's why they built a school on top. He said, children forget, but they also repeat, routines, songs, names called over and over in roll call, as if the earth below was listening, feeding on the pattern. That's why the basement was bricked up in 72. Because something changed. A teacher found drawings on the walls, not made by students, made by hands too long and nails too sharp. And no one remembered how they got there. Father Ellis said they tried to seal it, but it only made it angry. It began echoing the names back, but wrong, missing syllables, adding sounds that didn't belong in any human tongue. He said the walls began to bleed, not red but black, as if the stone itself was rotting from the inside. Yea, he said he saw the thing only once when he was young, before he took his vows, when he still had doubts. He said it did not move, did not breathe, but it looked at him with a gaze that unlearned him, that took apart everything he believed about light and grace. When the deputy asked what it wanted, he just whispered, attention, obedience, and something more than worship. It wants memory. It wants to be remembered, as if it was once forgotten, and punished the world for it. That night, Father Ellis was found dead in his cell, mouth torn open, tongue missing, yet no signs of forced entry, and the only thing written on the wall, in his blood, was a name, the same one from the circle, the one no one could translate. The state ordered a full excavation within the week, brought in contractors from Richmond, anthropologists from Duke, 3 seminary observers, and 2 forensic units from Quantico. The school was declared off-limits to the public, yet locals still gathered across the road each morning, watching, waiting, some in silence, some in prayer, some holding photographs of children who'd gone missing decades ago, children the town no longer had files for, or even names. The digging began slowly. The foundation was deeper than expected, wider too, reinforced with stone that did not match the quarry records. Beneath the 3rd layer, they found carvings, not chiseled, but grown, as if the stone itself had birthed symbols, twisting inward in spiral formations, repetitive, mathematical but not human. By day 6, they hit what they assumed was a crypt, square layout, chalk-lined walls, but no doors, no ceiling, just a pit. And in that pit, something wrong. It wasn't wood, wasn't concrete. It pulsed, not like a heartbeat, but like breath, a slow inhale, and an impossibly slow exhale. One of the workers touched it. His glove dissolved, so did 3 layers of skin, and he began to speak in rhyme, verses no one recognized, but the rhythm matched a hymn banned by the Vatican in 1911. They called in hazmat. But by then it was too late. 2 of the seminary observers had already gone missing, and the 3rd had scrawled diagrams in the dirt. Not blueprints, but anatomical charts, of things with no face, no bone, only names. The structure beneath wasn't structural, it was living, not metaphorically, but literally. Flesh, bone, vein, a thing buried so long ago, the earth had made peace with it, until someone built a school on its mouth and taught children to speak. In rhythm, one geologist said it best. This wasn't an archaeological site, it was a womb, and the thing inside was almost done gestating. They shut down the excavation that evening, but the wreathing didn't stop. Even after the filled dirt was dumped back in, even after the concrete was poured, even after the land was blessed again by 3 different religions, that night every bird in the county flew east, every mirror cracked at 3:17 a.m., and 4 former students, all grown, all living in different states, took their own lives at the same hour, without a note, without a sound, and in each of their homes, scratched into the drywall, a single word, the same one from the wall behind the altar, but now it was spelled perfectly. Within days, every document relating to the school, from county ledgers to state accreditation files to press clippings in archived microfilm, vanished, some burned, some retracted, some rewritten entirely. A man from the Historical Integrity Office showed up, demanded access to the original founding documents. But the town clerk said something odd. She didn't remember there ever being a school on that land, not even a foundation. Just an empty parcel the town never knew what to do with. When asked what year she was born, she paused, looked at her birth certificate, then folded it in half and threw it in the trash. Without explanation, something had begun undoing memory, not as an event, but as a structure. Photographs melted without heat. Ink faded on journals written in sealed safes. Even tattoos on survivors began to blur, as if skin itself was surrendering meaning. And still, the pit beneath the earth continued breathing. A pastor from North Carolina, who claimed to be studying forgotten religions, held a sermon just outside the old gate. But he never mentioned God, only referenced a series of numbers, which, when plotted on a map, drew a spiral inward to the very room where the altar once stood. One boy, now a man, now a recluse, sent a letter to the local paper. It was unsigned, written in charcoal, and delivered with no return address. The letter read, "They used us to feed it. The chanting wasn't worship, it was hunger. And the more perfect we became, the more perfect it became. But when it was full, it stopped needing words. Now it listens. Now it learns." The letter was confiscated by federal agents the next day, and the editor who published it disappeared during a morning hike. His last voicemail said one thing: no greeting, no farewell. Just, "They're burying the wrong history, and it's going to bury us back." The town's timeline began to break, not dramatically but subtly. Birth records from 1963 showed twins who never existed. A 1971 wedding license had the same witness listed 3 times, once as a man, once as a woman, once as something crossed out in red. And in the museum, the section labelled "Education in Our County" was walled off overnight, by bricks that had no mortar and no origin. The curator swore she never approved the construction, but when asked what should be behind the wall, she simply said, "I forget. I've always forgotten, and so should you." The ground trembled, not like an earthquake, but like breath held too long. Finally exhaled. A crew installing fibre lines on the outskirts hit something buried. It wasn't metal, wasn't stone, but it rang like a bell under water, low, sick, alive. When they dug deeper, they found what looked like walls, but curved inward, like ribs, charred black from the inside, yet pulsing, soft to the touch. One worker reached out. His hand sank through, not pierced, not cut, just passed cleanly through the membrane. And he didn't pull it back. He simply stared, whispered something, then stepped forward and vanished. The hole was sealed within the hour, not by authorities, but by men in uniforms no one could name. Their trucks were unmarked, their faces not quite symmetrical, and when asked who sent them, they all answered the same. We were always here. By morning, the town's street names had changed, not officially, but on signs, on maps, even in people's mouths. Barrow Street was now Elura Way, Millstone Road, now Elther Lane, and the property where the building once stood now showed no structure, just a sinkhole, fenced off, labelled in black text that read, "Do not unearth." A boy drawing in chalk nearby sketched a perfect spiral, then another, then 13 more. When asked what he was drawing, he said, "It told me," then pointed to the empty air above the ground. Weather patterns shifted, animals migrated in circles, trees refused to grow within a 2-mile radius, and static filled radios when tuned near the coordinates. But still, people forgot. A documentary crew arrived, interviewed survivors, filmed the perimeter. But when the footage was developed, every frame past the 26th minute turned black, except one, a single flicker. A girl standing at the gate, mouth open, eyes missing, holding a book that bled. The crew never released the film. They left town, all of them, except the sound editor, who stayed behind, said he heard some.
A thing in the final audio said it wasn't human, wasn't words, just the rhythm of breath, too steady, too deep, too old. And on the anniversary, locals say the ground gets warm, like it's remembering or waiting. And if you walk by the fence, you'll see things in the dirt, things that shift when you don't look directly. Some say it was a school, some say it was a lie. But the oldest ones, the ones who never speak aloud, they just nod, then draw a spiral on the nearest surface and whisper, "It fed, it learned, it sleeps, but not forever."